I have some great news for General Hospital spoilers fans. Actor Jonathan Bennett is joining the show, and that's been confirmed. Jonathan will also be taking on a new role, a new character on screen in General Hospital. I think General Hospital may be stepping into one of those rare moments where a single new character can shift the entire temperature of Port Charles. I feel like Jonathan entering the canvas as Joe Fitzpatrick could be way more than a simple casting splash. From my perspective, this kind of move usually means the show wants to stir up the power structure, shake loose some stale alliances, and test the people who have been running on old energy for too long. I could be wrong, but I keep looking at Sonny and thinking that this is exactly the kind of moment where the show asks a brutal question: what happens when the king is still standing, but the kingdom is starting to outgrow him? I think that is the real tension here. I am not just looking at Joe as the new guy. I am looking at him as a possible disruptor, a wild card, maybe even a replacement for a role Port Charles has been quietly missing. And that is why I feel like this casting has such a strong hook. It is not only about who Jonathan Bennett is. It is about what kind of energy Joe brings into a world that already feels fractured, tired, and dangerously close to a new kind of mob war. In my opinion, the current situation feels like a pressure cooker. I think Sonny has been operating in a version of Port Charles that no longer fully belongs to him. For years, he was the center of gravity, the man everyone feared, the man everyone reacted to, the man who could turn a room with just a look. But now, from my perspective, he feels like a boss standing on a floor that is starting to crack beneath him. I feel like that matters more than people want to admit. I think the reason this story has so much energy is because the show seems to be inviting a generational shift. I could be wrong, but I get the sense that newer threats, newer alliances, and newer personalities are closing in on Sonny's old way of doing business. That creates a fascinating kind of discomfort for me as a viewer, because I do not think the show is simply asking, can Sonny win? I think it is asking, can Sonny still inspire the kind of fear and loyalty that once made him untouchable? Those are not the same thing. And that is where Joe enters, at least in my head. I feel like a new character with this much buzz is not arriving just to stand in the background. I think the show wants me to wonder whether Joe is a threat, a helper, a relative, a rival, or maybe all four at once. That uncertainty is exactly what I want from a soap opera. I have to be honest. I feel excited, suspicious, and a little greedy for answers all at once. I think that is the best kind of soap reaction because it means the story has already gotten under my skin before it has even had time to fully play out. I feel like Jonathan Bennett has the kind of screen presence that can either make a character feel charming and dangerous or polished and secretly volcanic, and for General Hospital that combination could be gold. I also feel a little restless because I think the audience has been waiting for a fresh male presence who can actually matter in more than one lane. Not just romance, not just business, not just a one-week guest run that disappears before it can breathe. I mean, a character who can affect the larger board. I could be wrong, but I think Joe Fitzpatrick sounds like a name the show could build into something with real teeth. And yes, I feel the Sonny angle immediately. I think whenever General Hospital introduces a new man with mystery around him, my mind goes straight to power, loyalty, and damage control. That is where the good soap lives. That is where the mess lives. That is where I want the story to stay. From my perspective, Sonny is one of those characters who becomes more interesting when the world around him stops cooperating. I think older, iconic mob bosses become compelling not when they are endlessly dominant, but when they have to confront the possibility that their old methods are no longer enough. That is why I think Sonny being older is not a weakness in the story. It is the story. I feel like people sometimes assume age simply means decline, but I do not see it that narrowly. Tita, I think age can mean experience, calculation, and a deeper kind of fatigue that makes every decision heavier. Sonny does not just have enemies. He has history. He has consequences. He has a long trail of relationships, betrayals, forgiveness, and unfinished business. To me, that is much more dramatic than just asking whether he can still throw his weight around. Still, I think the show may be nudging him toward a dangerous realization. The world has changed, and not everyone fears him the way they used to. I could be wrong, but I think that is why a character like Joe matters so much. If Sonny needs a new edge, he cannot simply ask the old world to keep pretending nothing has shifted. He needs someone who can meet the new world where it actually lives. I think Joe is being introduced as a kind of narrative mirror. Maybe he is a brother, maybe a blood relation, maybe a stranger who feels strangely familiar, maybe a man who simply looks like he belongs in Sonny's orbit from the second he arrives. From my perspective, the name Joe Fitzpatrick feels deliberate. It sounds grounded, old school, and dangerous in a quiet way. That alone makes me think the show wants him to feel less like a flashy newcomer and more like someone with hidden weight. I feel like the best version of Joe is not a character who immediately declares himself Sonny's savior or enemy. I think the best version is someone who makes me lean in, because I cannot tell which direction he is going. Is he loyal? Is he opportunistic? Is he a family revelation? Is he the kind of man who smiles while calculating exactly how much control he can take? I could be wrong, but I think that ambiguity is the real fuel here. And if Joe ends up being Sonny's half-brother, I think that opens up a very juicy emotional lane. Not just crime, not just power, identity, legacy, resentment, belonging. Those are the kinds of things that can make a mob story feel personal instead of mechanical. I feel like the show gets much stronger when the danger is also emotional. I think Joe could become a pressure valve for Sonny's whole world. If Sonny is currently feeling boxed in by enemies, age, and shifting alliances, then Joe might arrive as the kind of man who can absorb some of that pressure and send it back out in a more controlled way. From my perspective, that would be the smartest use of the character. I do not need Joe to be a carbon copy of Jason. I actually think that would be a mistake. I feel like the show would be better off if Joe is dangerous in a different way. Jason is often written as the ruthless cleaner, the man who handles the aftermath, the silent enforcer who makes the chaos disappear. I think Joe could be more slippery than that. Maybe he is less predictable. Maybe he is less loyal in the conventional sense. Maybe he brings charisma, nerve, and a willingness to improvise. I could be wrong, but I think that could make him far more unsettling to Sonny's enemies. I also think Joe could become the kind of man who changes the board not by replacing Jason, but by forcing Sonny to rethink what loyalty even means. That to me is the bigger story. Not who is the new right-hand man, but what kind of protector does Sonny need now that the old formula is weakening? I think there are a few directions this could go, and honestly, I like that uncertainty. One possibility is that Joe is Sonny's blood family, and the show uses that reveal to instantly destabilize everything. I feel like that would be a classic soap move, but a satisfying one. If Joe is a half-brother Sonny never knew, then I think the story becomes less about crime and more about inheritance. Who gets the loyalty? Who gets the name? Who gets to carry the burden? I could be wrong, but that kind of setup almost writes itself. Another possibility is that Joe is not family at all, but still becomes indispensable. From my perspective, that could be even more interesting. I think a dangerous outsider who earns Sonny's trust by surviving the chaos around him might create a stronger long-term dynamic. I would love to see Joe prove himself through action instead of exposition. Let the guy walk into a mess and figure it out. Let him surprise me. A third path is the one I think would be the most fun. Joe starts as an ally but slowly reveals a sharper agenda. I feel like that would be delicious soap storytelling. Sonny thinks he has found a shield, but maybe he has actually invited a new kind of threat into the room. I think that possibility keeps the character alive longer, because it forces the audience to keep reevaluating him. I think Sonny might actually need to step back more than some fans want to admit. There, I said it. I know that is probably not the most comfortable opinion, but from my perspective, the show gets more interesting when it stops treating Sonny like the only possible center of gravity. I feel like endless protection of the status quo can flatten a story, even one with a legacy as huge as General Hospital. I could be wrong, but I think giving Joe real room to grow could do more for the show than keeping Sonny permanently at the top of the mountain. That does not mean I want Sonny erased. Not at all. I want him challenged. I want him forced into a corner where he has to adapt. I want him to feel the loss of certainty. That is where the best version of Sonny lives, in my opinion. And yes, I know some people will hear that and immediately think I am disrespecting the legacy. I am not. I think legacy only matters when it is tested. If Sonny can evolve, that makes him stronger. If he cannot, then the story has to ask why. That question is more interesting to me than repeating the same power fantasy again and again. I feel like this casting could be the spark that gives Port Charles a much-needed jolt. I think Jonathan Bennett has the kind of presence that can make a new role feel instantly watchable, and I think Joe Fitzpatrick has just enough mystery around him to keep me guessing. From my perspective, the most exciting thing is not whether Joe becomes a hero or a villain. It is whether he changes the emotional geometry around Sonny. I think the best soap stories make me argue with myself. I feel like this one already is. Part of me wants Joe to be Sonny's rescue. Part of me wants Joe to be Sonny's replacement. Part of me wants Joe to be the one person who can actually outmaneuver the whole system. I could be wrong, but that tension is exactly why I am paying attention. And I think that is where I land. Not on certainty, but on possibility. I do not want a neat answer. I want a dangerous one. So I want to hear what you think. I think Joe Fitzpatrick could be Sonny's new right hand, Sonny's hidden family, or Sonny's biggest mistake waiting to happen. I could be wrong, but this is just my interpretation, and I would love to know whether you see Joe as a protector, a rival, or the beginning of a full Port Charles takeover.